I'm Courtney. We're a family of 5 trying to grow as much of our own food as we can, and we raise chickens. Our kids wanted to name our little backyard farm, so we did. It's called Heart Pine Farms. We're pretty passionate about cover crops, and we want to share with you how you can reap the benefits of cover crops in your home garden. A few years ago, we finally planted them. We had been hearing about the many benefits for a while, and we finally did lots of research and jumped in. We're so glad we did. The differences you can really see are the improved soil tilth and fertility, and ultimately your healthier, more prolific plants and harvests. We garden organically, and cover crops and compost are 2 ways we keep our soil healthy and reduce or even eliminate the need to fertilize altogether. It's October 16th, and we wanted to give you a quick look at our entire garden. We usually just focus in on 1 or 2 garden beds that we're working on at the time when we make our videos, but right now is a transitional time, and we wanted to show you the entire thing to show you how we're transitioning from fall into the winter season, which is always kind of a bittersweet time because you miss the summer harvests and the tomatoes and peppers and all of the summer flavors. But the truth is the garden beds really do need a really good rest, and one of the good ways that you can give it a really good rest is to actually plant things in your garden bed, and we will show you that in just a minute. We have 28 raised beds in our garden, and this is the first row right here. So on the end there's a grow bag here where we're growing chives. Chives are perennials, and they'll go dormant for a little while through the winter time, and then they will take off in the spring. But fall is a really good time for chives because they like cool weather and they'll really take off. So these are the chives, and this bed right here is a vacant bed. The second bed right here we just planted garlic in yesterday, and we have garlic in this bed too. And garlic in this bed. We grew Enchilium red and Sicilian garlic. And here's another vacant garden bed right here. In this bed we have spinach and we have lettuce. And then on the very far end we have green onions. And the final bed right here in this row we have beets. We also have a few bare spots where some of the beets didn't take off, so we planted some lettuce seeds that should be germinating soon. And then here on the end we have 2 more grow bags, and we're growing chives. We have to pull some weeds in here. Starting off with the second row here. These grow bags, there's a vacant one right here. This one we were growing cilantro in, and we're going to be saving the seeds from these plants, so we're just letting them dry out. And they also reseed themselves, so there will be cilantro growing in these 2 grow beds in the springtime. Our rattlesnake pole bean plants that are dying off are still part of our fall garden because we're waiting for these bean pods to totally dry out, because we save these dried bean seeds and we eat them as refried beans or in chili, and they're so delicious. So if you've never grown rattlesnake beans, we highly recommend them. In this bed right here we have carrots, which we need to pull weeds in this bed and thin these carrots. But carrots are growing in this first bed. In the second bed we have more carrots. And then in this bed we have bell star broccoli growing. Okay, and then the final 4 beds here are vacant. And then this grow bed has basil, dried basil, and we're actually going to save the seeds from this dried out basil plant. Okay, and then in the third row over here we have more dried basil, and we're still getting some good parsley right here. So we'll continue to enjoy that until it's done. And here's a vacant bed. Another vacant bed right here. And in this bed we're growing broccoli, more bell star broccoli. In this bed right here, we just started to see parsnips germinating. Now here's one right here, tiny little seedling right here. In this bed we have more carrots. This bed needs to be weeded. And in this bed we have some carrots that are getting bigger that we have already thinned right here, and they're doing really well. We grow Danvers carrots in our raised beds because they're really good for growing in raised beds. They don't get as long, and they're also really good for canning. So this last row here, most of these beds are vacant except for the very last one over here. We are also about to do a sweet potato harvest. This is the first time that we've grown sweet potatoes in raised beds, so we're excited for this harvest to see what comes out of here. So I have dug down a little bit just to see, and I've felt some good sized ones, so hopefully we'll get a bunch of them. We're pretty excited about these. Now this is our row garden area in the back, and we're still working on amending this soil right here, but this is where our pumpkin patch and our sunflower patch go, and our sunflowers did really well this year, but the pumpkins not so much. So we're going to keep working on amending this soil back here and experimenting with it and seeing how it goes. And these are our strawberry rows. We planted some new strawberry plants in the spring, and clearly weeds have taken over because we have not kept up with this, but life happens, and we're going to pull these weeds out, and hopefully these strawberry plants will give us plenty of strawberries in the late spring, early summer. These are June bearing plants, so we picked the blossoms off this year so that next year the plants can put their energy towards lots of good strawberries, and hopefully the weeds have not ruined them, but the plants themselves look pretty good, so we're hopeful. So we've done tons of research and we've experimented throughout the years, and we have figured out that the best way to fill up vacant garden beds is with cover crops. We never want to leave any of our beds vacant again for lots of different reasons. Probably one of the most obvious reasons that you've heard about is the nitrogen fixing that cover crops provide, and that's if you grow a legume cover crop. Now the nitrogen fixing doesn't happen until a little bit later on, like 6 weeks after you plant the cover crops. They actually take nitrogen from the soil when they're growing. So you really benefit from the nitrogen fixing in the springtime when you turn your cover crops over. The biomass goes into the soil, and that's when the real nitrogen fixing happens. The next huge benefit that you get from cover crops is the actual organic matter that goes into your garden beds. So you turn your cover crops over in the spring, probably 4 to 6 weeks before you plant in your beds, before you plant your crops, and the biomass that goes into the soil feeds the microorganisms in the soil and creates a very healthy soil environment. The other really important benefit is cover crops left on your beds through the winter until you turn them under in the spring provide a really nice mulch. So this mulch helps prevent erosion from happening, and even in raised beds we experience erosion through heavy rain that happens in the fall, through the winter, and even into the spring. You will actually lose a lot of valuable soil from your garden beds. So the cover crops are like a blanket that help hold the soil into the beds. Cover crops also choke out weeds. Here in Zone 7B, we have winter annuals, and we also have spring weeds that creep up as soon as the temperatures start to warm up in the springtime. So this is such a huge time saver because the cover crops literally choke the weeds out. So when we have to prepare our beds for planting in the spring, the only thing we're really doing is turning the cover crops in. We're not trying to pick nasty weeds that are almost impossible to remove and lose soil through that process. The mulch that the cover crops provide when you turn them under is the biomass, and you're not dealing with those nasty weeds. You might be wondering which cover crops are best to plant in your specific garden and area, and my advice would be just to do some research on that. Some cover crops are winter kill cover crops, which means that they will die when the temperature reaches 20 degrees in the winter time, which is fine. We have in our mix, we have cover crops that are annuals and they'll die in the winter time. They just provide that good mulch until you turn them under in the spring. A good mix is always really good of legumes and cover crops that will provide biomass because you'll have the nitrogen fixing and lots of good biomass compost going into your soil. So a good mix is always really nice. The timing of planting your cover crops is important though. You want to make sure to plant them either 2 weeks to maybe a month before your first frost. You don't want the cover crops planted too early because then they're going to mature and some of them go to seed, and that's when they become kind of like weeds, and you don't want really all of those volunteers in your garden beds. You want the benefit of the actual plant and the nitrogen fixing and the biomass from that plant. So the ideal time is probably I don't know, we're probably 3 or 4 weeks before our first frost so that the cover crops can get going, but they're not going to go too far. Planting cover crops is really, really easy. It's not a picky process whatsoever. So you just take a handful and you broadcast them across the soil like this. Prepare the beds for cover crops, really all we did was we tore out our plants like the tomato plants and pepper plants that are done, and we made sure to get any debris, as much debris as we could, out of the beds. And of course, you know, we always have Bermuda. We have to pick out as much as we can if we have any weeds. And we also let our chickens go on the beds too, because they just help us get pesky insects out, and they help us with the cleanup process here before we put our cover crops down. So we've had our raised beds for 4 years now, and since we use untreated lumber, we obviously have some decomposing that's happening, and we're planning on doing some repair work this winter, so we will make videos about that. Okay, so we're just gonna work these seeds in. This is so easy. You just take a rake and you barely work these seeds under like this. Just lightly rake the surface. So they're mostly covered with soil. Do you remember last year when when I was all worried about the seeds being covered by the soil, and I was out here poking the seeds like this? Like that? Yes. That was kind of a waste of time. I guess I'm kind of anal, so I was worried about these seeds being covered enough to grow. And I'll tell you that the beds that I was not out here hand poking seeds into, they grew just fine. So if you look at the bed and you're worried about whether these seeds are getting covered enough, they're going to be just fine, don't worry. Okay, I'm just gonna water these seeds in because it's so dry. We don't have any rain in the forecast for the next couple of weeks, so I'm just gonna make sure we give these cover crop seeds enough water just to get going. And hopefully it won't be too much of an issue this fall, because we usually get plenty of rain. And they're really not very picky. They're very easy to grow. So give them a good soaking here. I just cannot help this. I have to do this a little bit more. It drives me nuts that they're not covered with dirt. I don't know, I think we just have to stop though, because I know they really are going to grow fine. You're not supposed to rake or till your soil when it's wet, so I'm just going to stop doing this. But I wish I could just stand out here and do this, but this is not feasible for 20 raised beds, so I have to step away, but it drives me nuts to see these seeds just sitting here on top of the soil. But you have to think, even on a large scale, like at a big farm, they have machines that spread the cover crops, and they just barely work them into the soil like this. There's not a person out here poking the seeds into the soil like this, so we just need to move along and be okay with it. We're also broadcasting cover crop seeds back here in our row garden. It's just all part of amending the soil back here. It's going to take a few years for us to build this soil up, but planting cover crops back here is a very good start here. Another benefit of cover crops is breaking up pest cycles and attracting beneficial insects. There are so many benefits, it's hard to list them all in one video. There are so many varieties of cover crops to meet different needs in home gardens, and we'd recommend looking at your favorite seed catalogs to see what they have to offer. You can never go wrong with healthier soil.